Thanks for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you. I know that generally you guys have a study group format and you talk about different things. And so we thought, as we were talking through this and looking at different topics, that maybe we could talk about the DNA of Spiritism, because it's something that might be interesting for a study group in general to think about and reflect, and also obviously each one of us. So what does that mean then? What do you really mean about DNA of Spiritism? Well, most of the time in study groups and Spiritist talks, we talk about what is Spiritism, or the content that Spiritism has helped us understand and how it can transform our lives. Every once in a while, I like to think about a little bit too of how is Spiritism? How does it really come about, and what kind of lessons, or sort of like hidden lessons, we can have for our lives? Because one wonderful thing that I think Spiritism has is its coherence, and it aligns very much with what it says. And the way that it came about also shows that the method through which it was created aligns with what it tells us. And I think there's a couple of really good messages there for us on how we can apply that own method to our lives. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence a little bit. We're going to get a little bit creative in the sense of we're not going to talk about things that Spiritism tells us most of the time. We're going to talk about Spiritism. So the challenging piece here is we're not going to cover in detail what Spiritism is, but we're going to touch on it a little bit. And so we're going to revise that because I think it's important to level set before we go on. And so if at any point in time you feel like you're a little bit lost, hang in there. If I don't get carried away, sometimes it happens, we'll have enough time for conversation at the end. Yeah, I am trying to have my timer here so I can not get carried away. Let's see if that works, right? So where do we start? Well, let's start by putting our glasses on so I can see what I'm actually doing. What do I mean? Well, what's Spiritism? I think, and I define Spiritism for myself, as a progressive body of knowledge. One of the most wonderful definitions that Allan Kardec has given us. Allan Kardec was the person who edited and brought it all together in the beginning and created Spiritism. He says in a little book called What is Spiritism? He says, Spiritism is a science which deals with the nature, the origin and destiny of spirits, as well as their relationship to the corporeal world. And I just like to tweak that word, science, to body of knowledge, because I do think it's a science. But I feel like nowadays we have the sense that science is like test tube science and number science. It has lost the word has sort of lost a little bit of its original meaning of like, it's a constant search for knowledge, right? And so Spiritism really is this constant search for knowledge that deals with this really big things of the spirit. What is the spirit? What are spirits? Are we spirits? Where do we come from? Where are we going to go? And what is the relationship of the spirits, us, in this physical world? What are we doing here and why? Big questions all around. So the study of Spiritism is really the constant search for knowledge and understanding about spirituality, about who we are, where we're coming from, where we're going, and how do we relate and live in this physical world? How does that happen? So it's pretty comprehensive, but it's really beautiful in many different ways, right? And if we begin to look at the beginning of Spiritism, we may have interesting clues as well on how we can begin to understand some things that sometimes go overlooked. What do I mean by that? Well, all right. So let's do this here really quick. So how did Spiritism start? Well, it officially started in 1857 in Paris, France, when a book called the Spirit's Book was published by that guy, Allan Kardec, that some of us may be familiar with. It was published in the Dentu bookstore at the Palais Royal. And what's really interesting is that the first edition of the Spirit's Book, 1857, April of 57, had 501 items in the first edition. And later, in the third edition, the one that we have today, it has grown to have 1,019. Isn't that interesting? So it started with less questions than we we have. But through time, Kardec continued to revise it and augment it and increase it and refine it to such a degree that by the third edition, we have 1,019 questions. It basically doubles in the number of questions there, a little bit more, right? Eventually it stops there because you can revise those questions forever, and I'm sure that had Kardec lived longer, maybe we would have bigger questions. But the beautiful thing is there are other works that continue to add to Spiritism, and that's sort of like our point today. If I can probably get this black bar out of the way here. Let's see if it works. It does work. No, it doesn't work. It will work now.
Can you stretch a little bit more?
There you go. Right? So now we have 1,019 questions. It still has the same 4 parts, and it's worldwide. It's not just in France, and has millions of copies. So it has evolved over time. And I think that is a really beautiful message, right? The first book of Spiritism that sort of kicked off all the movement and everything else also grew, not only in size, but in depth and perspective. So I wonder if there isn't a lesson for us in there too, that we are supposed to grow and deepen ourselves and continue to improve ourselves along the way. I think that's very poetic and very beautiful in there. And so then, just level set, what are some of the key things that we find in Spiritism? Some of the things that we're very familiar with sometimes, right? One of them is the immortality of the spirit. Through all the experiences and the different phenomena that were taking place in the 1850s in the US, in Paris, and other places in Europe, Kardec went around doing these experiments, looking at different things, and we realized through many different ways that there were indeed spirits trying to communicate with us by calling out our attention. We could do a talk just on that some other time because it's fascinating how it all came about, but our time is limited. So I'm going to park that in here for the curious who might want to know more about that so they can research. But we understand that we're mortal. Who we are doesn't stop being. And that's powerful knowledge because it has the possibility to transform the way we look at the world and how we look ourselves. If we are immortal spirits, that means that we never die. Then does that change the way we live our lives? It should, right? Because then my choices and my decisions don't need to be based just on the here and now, but it can be based on the long run. What is best for me, immortal spirit that I am, that is going to live many more lives? Because one of the things that we also notice, what there is this thing called reincarnation. And reincarnation is a fundamental piece of Spiritism, which, by the way, is part of a little part of spiritualism, right? And in that part, we really believe in reincarnation. And what does that mean? That we live many physical lives because the purpose of our incarnation, the purpose of our physical life today, is to get better. And in the process of getting better, help other people improve and the world improve too. So if we continue to grow through many lifetimes, then it also has the potential, again, to change the way we act and we behave. The challenge is we don't see all those lives at once because we're busy in this one. And sometimes they get murky. It's sort of like when you go to Netflix and you start watching a new series on episode 7 of the second season, right? You just get that episode, and it has meaning, it has a plot, and it has all this kind of stuff. But sometimes it's interesting. It would be really great if you could follow the series from the beginning to see how things have progressed. And maybe you understand that the bad guy in episode 7 was actually not the bad guy in episode 6. There was a couple of things, right? So we don't get that, but nevertheless, the important thing here is that reincarnation really is a really powerful tool of divine love that allows us to do what? To get better over time, to try new things. And it's not a bad thing that sometimes we forget what was in episode 6 or episode 5 or 4, because it has given us a chance to start again. Imagine if I knew from the beginning that I didn't like you from previous episodes, right? It would make things hard, right? More likely you wouldn't like me. I probably like you, but you know what I mean, right? So reincarnation is one of them, and mediumship is also a key one. What is mediumship? It's a natural ability that all of us have to sense the influence of spirits like us who are not in a physical body. Because we pass away from a physical body, we spend some time reflecting and preparing on the other side, and then we come back. In the between, we can communicate and talk. And that's part of like the big thing about Spiritism is this mediumship part. Why? Because I think you might have noticed that pretty much every religion or religious thinking or spiritual philosophy tells you that there is an afterlife. And he promises you that there is a future, which is great. That is true. But very few, I haven't really found many, and that's why I find Spiritism so interesting. Spiritism is the one that for me explains and proves that that is indeed the case, because it allows us to understand how to talk to those who have lived lives before us and are on the other side, and they are able to tell us, yep, there is life after life. Here's the proof. Here's what's going to happen. Here's how it happens. And here's how I was, and here's how I am now, right? So this mediumship is an important thing because that allows us to get a couple of important pieces of information that normally we wouldn't have. Mediumship was not invented with Spiritism. It has always been there in the whole of history. We just call it by different names. The word mediumship didn't exist back in the day. We've called people prophets. We call them oracles. We've called them so many different names. Shamans. There's so many different names in there. But what's really great about Spiritism is that we have taken to study it systematically and understand how it works. So for over 170 years now, we have been really big on understanding how this connection between the two worlds live, right? So that's important to kind of hold on in there because we should ask ourselves that question too, right? And of course, God. God is a central piece to everything that we believe. The spirits have also told us there is a God. Now, the word God, I understand, can be very loaded, right? People have different perceptions and so forth. Substitute the word God by whatever word works for you. But there is a central force, powerful, all-loving, all-knowing creator of the universe that we use the name God for. Sometimes I like to joke around and say it's the G-O-D. It is the guiding, organizing, designing principle of the universe. Whatever floats your boat, right? Whatever works for you. We just use the word God. And Jesus is in there too, right? So when asked some of our spirit guides in the beginning of Spiritism and in the Spirit's book to say, you know, we know we have a lot of guides that really behaved well and showed us, is there a best person that could serve as a guide and model for us? And the spirits tell us Jesus was the best one, not the only one though. Let's be clear. Sometimes we get into these little football team discussions of, you know, who's better, and it's not the point, right? The point is finding a guide, a model that inspires you and show you how it can be done. Because it's not supposed to be just theory. It's supposed to be applied so that you bring this to your life and then, right, you get better at it and you feel happier and you feel more fulfilled, right? I myself am fascinated, for instance, with many different guides, but I love the works of the Buddha. I find them psychologically beautiful. I think he was the first psychologist out there. But anyways, that's a conversation for another day as well, right? So these are the key learnings, but we're really not talking about this today. That was just to kind of derail you completely. Really, what I want to talk about is the way that Spiritism changed things significantly. I really think that Spiritism is a new way of thinking about spirituality and spiritual that came about in the right time of our history, the age of reasoning in the 1850s, and leveraged that reasoning to help us understand all these things that some of us have always been struggling with throughout human history. Had Spiritism come before, we would not have the rational perspective to really investigate it and go deeper. So I think that the spirits were waiting on the other side for us as a humanity to develop a level of reasoning good enough to understand and search things scientifically to be able to give us that. Had it been born 100 years before, 200 years before, probably would not have lasted, right? And so what is so great about it? So here's the things that I want to talk to you about today and I found fascinating. Spiritism was born of inquiry. It was born of questions, of questioning. Generally, you have spiritual thinking. There's a person that receives this revelation, right? A prophet or somebody. And then it becomes about what that person said. Then after that person dies, it becomes about what that person said. And then everybody starts to interpret that. and 7 generations later, you can't quite be sure what happened there. Because it's interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation of the interpretation, right? It's hard. But Spiritism from the beginning was about questions. It was about this guy, called Allan Kardec, going to different places and asking questions to different people and bringing all this information together. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm getting ahead of myself. But it's born of inquiry. It is also fact-based. It also looks for facts and proof that things are that they are. If they are, we should accept it. If not, we should set them aside until a point where we know that that fact does not work, or it does work. If it does not work, we toss it. If it works, we take it, right? Something else about Spiritism that I also find fascinating, and if I'm talking too quickly, let me know. I look at the clock, I get excited, I calculate the time left, and sometimes I speed up. It's progressive. It's always growing. Spiritism started in 1857, but remember, it's a progressive body of knowledge. It didn't stop there. It continues to grow. It is bigger today than it was in the beginning. I think it's awesome. It's also open source. The term didn't exist over there, but anybody can add to Spiritism if you are so willing. If you want to do your research, if you want to study and propose something new, and there's other people that agree with you, that might be taken up. And that might become part of Spiritism. Fascinating. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And it's also flat and democratic. There is no boss in Spiritism. That's different. Very different. Very interesting, but very difficult too. Because when it's decentralized and has no boss, sometimes it creates confusion. Because you're like, who's the final answer on this? Who's going to stamp this and say this is true? You are. And that's hard sometimes to digest. Because sometimes we just want that answer, right? Just tell me what it is, right? And last and not least, it's practical. It's for everyday use. It came from everyday inquiries. It came from everyday research. It has to be applied to our everyday life. If it just stays here when we come and talk about it, then it misses some of its pizzazz, some of its power, right? So what do you mean by that, Daniel? Okay, let's kind of like go a little bit into that and then see how it goes. We'll go quickly through it, right? So it's born of inquiry. What does that mean? Well, it really means that it was curiosity and a desire to know that moved us forward. If you remember how Spiritism came about, or if you came across that, it was really a series of phenomena taking place in Paris. Tables were moving in this little seances. People were like playing games. There was no Netflix back then. People didn't have to do, so they would get together. They would like do these things. And there was this guy, this famous educator called Professor Rivel. And a lot of learned people thought there was something interesting going on in the phenomena that most people were not seeing and getting. And they really wanted him to investigate because he was known for his scientific mind. He had published a lot of books on education throughout Paris and throughout France. He was a smart guy. And he's like, nah, I don't have time for that. And people insisted. Eventually he gets there and he starts to go to these meetings and he sees this phenomena of chairs moving, and then he says something powerful that's beautiful, and it's so obvious that sometimes makes me angry because it's so obvious. What did he say? He says, every effect has a cause, right? Something happens because something caused it. Every intelligent effect has an intelligent cause. If something happens in a manner that is programmed or is intelligent, then there has to be some sort of intelligence that made this, because no dumb people or thing can make something smart, right? So if a chair starts to move, and it won't move, don't worry, just an example. If a chair starts to move here today, and you say, chair, move to the right, and the chair moves to the right, hold on a second, that's an intelligent effect. And you know the chair does not have ears or a brain or a nervous system. So it's not the chair moving by itself. Somebody else is acting on that chair, right? Does that make sense? And so he starts to say, okay, if these things are happening, there's something behind here. What is it? Is it fraud? Is somebody tricking me? How can I know? I have an idea. I am going to go to different places, to different meetings, with different members of the meetings and seances, and I'm going to ask the same questions and see what happens. Because if one group is cheating me here, or frauding me here, or defrauding me here, that's unlikely to happen in different places. So he starts to go to different places, and he starts to get the same answers, and he starts to ask those questions, and he, hold on a second, so who are you? And then the whole thing begins, right? The spirits say, we are the ones moving this chair. How do they say that? It's a whole system that's super interesting. It's called tipology in the beginning. It was like, knock once for yes, knock two for no. Then it was like, knock one for A, knock twice for B. Imagine how long that took at the beginning. We call that spiritual technology, right? Eventually, through that communication, they say, the spirits on the other side say, hey, we're spirits. We're immortal beings just like you. There's a better way of doing this, right? Let's why don't you hold this little basket and we'll help move the basket with a pencil, then I'll hold your hand, and then we're like mediumship 3.0, right? So technology has improved and we can do mediumship differently today. But it started, my point is, with curiosity and desire to know. And so I ask ourselves, well, this is fascinating. It might be very different for many different people, but do we also do that with our lives? If we really are embracing Spiritism or want to, shouldn't we also embrace this curiosity and desire to know? Are we asking questions about our life? How does this work? How do I know what I know? Is it really this way? Huh. Right? So it's not about just coming in here and reading and taking my word for granted. It's following your curiosity and your desire to know and checking that. And I think that is a great reminder of how Spiritism can help us in our lives. Are we being curious enough about other people and ourselves? Are we trying to learn new things? Where is it taking us? What is it that we want to know? What are we doing about it? So there's one thing. Another interesting thing that we mentioned about Spiritism is that it's facts-based, right? And it goes together with the whole idea of born of inquiry. What do I mean by that? Because it's a body of knowledge. It's born out of observation. You have to collect facts and link them together. So if something is not true, like we mentioned, for instance, the way that Kardec went around the different groups and asked the same question in different places, right? Let's say that he went to 5 groups and he obtained 4 answers that were the same and 1 that was different. He would look at that and say, this 5th one is not jiving with the other 4. I'm gonna toss it, right? It doesn't align. And he would do that constantly with different places, with different people, with different mediums, and so forth. So it was about finding out what the facts were first before you decided to make a hypothesis of what was happening. And once you do that, you then have enough facts to say, I think I now know how this works, right? And so I ask myself, in many ways, if we are doing that with our lives, especially in this day and age, where sometimes we're not checking the facts. So, are we paying attention to the facts, or are we just accepting somebody else's proposition of what a fact is? Or are we trying to make the facts fit our own narrative? We got to stop that. If somebody walks in here today, a friend of mine, and doesn't look at me and sits down, I could create an image, a story in my mind and say, oh my God, she walked in here, didn't even talk to me. I bet she's having a challenge with me. She doesn't like me. Or she hates that I bought new shoes. Whatever it is. And then I start to create a narrative in my mind with facts that may not be true. And then we go on without talking to that person for a while, or create this whole thing, and all of a sudden, friendship that was 10 years old is gone. But if I were to ask her, hey, are we okay? I noticed that you came in and you didn't say hello to me, and that was important to me. What's going on? She might say, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't see you there. Or I am frustrated with you. Or you know what? I'm sorry, I am sick, or my child is sick, and I have troubles at work. My bank account is overdrawn. I am not focused. And I'm like, oh, that's a lot different than the narrative that I created. So are we checking the facts of these little things that we get into? Are we checking the facts of what people tell us about the stories that we tell in our heads? Are we checking the facts about ourselves and what we make them to be of ourselves? Sometimes we have this image of ourselves that is, oh, I'm a really patient guy, and then I walk out of here and then I cut two people in traffic and show them the fingers, and that's not coherent. It doesn't align, right? And so are we analyzing, are we observing ourselves and others, and are we bringing that to our lives? Are we doing a facts-based approach to things? That's something that we should think about. That's what Spiritism invites us to do. What do you know? How do you know? And does that align with what you understand? If you don't know, ask. Ask. That's how it all started. Questions. Ask. Right? You don't have to have the answers. You just have to have the questions. It will get you those answers. What else? What else is interesting about Spiritism? It's progressive. And I love that very much because it builds on previous knowledge. That's why it's so important to have those facts, right? Once you have facts that you can trust, you can build on those and keep building and keep building and keep building and keep growing. For instance, Spiritism was built on the Spirit's book. And a lot of it came from those questions and answers, and all the books came after that. We could have a conversation about the 4 parts of the Spirit's book, how they mirror the other 4 books of the codification. The first part, the Spirit's book, is the foundation. The second part of the Spirit's book is called the spiritual world. The second book of the codification is called the medium's book, which is how you understand the spiritual world. The third part of the codification is more ethical laws and more on how to live. And the third book of the codification is the gospel as understood by Spiritism, which breaks down some of the maxims of Jesus and how that's ethical living. The fourth book is Heaven and Hell, which is what happens, future causes, hopes, and solaces. So there's an alignment there. There's a lot of alignment in Spiritism that is fascinating. But what I think is really great is it's called the Spirit's book. It's not called Kardec's book. And by that own thinking, the same thinking, it's not called Kardecism. It's called Spiritism because it's not the work of Kardec. It's not the work of one mind. It is the work of many different minds, both incarnate and discarnate, that is, with the physical body and without the physical body. Kardec is amazing. He did the editing, he did the bringing together, and we owe him a lot. But it's not a religion of Kardec. That is why the spirits told him, no, you cannot use your real name, Reveil. Change your name. Kardec is a name of your previous life. That's how you sign the book. Because there should be no idea, basically here stated, this is my interpretation, that people should think it's yours, because it's not the creation of one person. He went to so many different meetings, asked so many different questions. So many other people gave him questions that they had asked in different places too. So from the beginning, it was clear that it was this progressive body of knowledge from the spirits, from the other side. It was not to have one physical person responsible for it. And it was supposed to grow, just like the Spirit's book grew. And it's still growing. It started with the Spirit's book, but it didn't end there. After that, he wrote more books, then more people started writing books, and many of us have come across wonderfully brilliant books in Spiritism that have led us to think differently. Some of us might have read Nosso Lar or many romances like 1,000 years ago by spirits such as Emmanuel, Joanna the Angelus. There's so many that that we can cite here that have added to what Spiritism is. Spiritism is richer today than it was before. So the question is, how are we still growing? What kind of effort are we doing in our lives to continue to gather that knowledge and build on ourselves? If we are immortal spirits, it makes sense that we will continue to study and don't come up with this whole idea of, I'm too old to learn. Can't do it. I'm retired now, too old to learn. Hold on a second. You're thinking one lifetime, but don't you want to get a leg up for the next? It's going to happen, right? You want to go to college at 82? Go for it. All in, right? Because you continue to grow. The spirit, the immortal spirit that you are, will continue to develop. So, how progressive are we in the sense of continue to learn and know more things? Are we doing that through our lives, or are we parking ourselves in our habits, in our customs? That's a difficult thing sometimes, isn't it? We all have the tendency to do that, especially as we get a little bit more mature. Okay? So that's an interesting thing. Something else that's interesting that we talked about here is the open source piece of this. Spiritism is open source, it's collaborative. Like we said, a lot of people gave input into it. Not only Kardec, right? But we need a figurehead sometimes where we are still, where we like to create saints and people that are important to us so that we have models, and I get that, that's great. But it's important for us to understand that we create things together, that we collaborate on it. That's why we have Spiritist groups, for instance. They are places in which you come and you exchange ideas about what you read and how we interpreted that which is Spiritism. And you learn from somebody's different perspective. And it's open to all. Nobody owns it. Anybody can write a new book. If you have a lot of experience or you've done some research and you want to write a book about some topic that is of interest with a Spiritist perspective, do it. Make it known. And if people pick it up over time, it might be just incorporated into what later on becomes like an important tool for people. We mentioned some books by Leon Denis. We mentioned books by Emmanuel, by Joanna de Angelis. Today they're forgiven. They're given that they're part of Spiritism. But imagine the first book that they wrote. People are like, let me check this out. I don't know who Joanna de Angelis is. I don't know who Emmanuel is. But with time, as people saw the content was good, he went forth. So, are we also open source with our lives? Are we also open to hearing from different people, to new things, to collaborating? Collaborating is hard. Dealing with other people is hard. And I'm sure they would say the same about us. But are we taking input and feedback from other people and triangulating? Are we letting that add to our lives? Or are we just closing ourselves off to everybody else and saying, nope, they think differently, I'm not going to listen to them? That is dangerous. That is very dangerous for us, not only in this lifetime, but over a course of many lifetimes. The world's doing a lot of that today. You may not agree. Collaborating doesn't mean agreeing or supporting it. It just means working together and trying to understand. So that's a good invitation for us. Before our time moves out, let's kind of move on. It's also flat and democratic. There is no boss. That is so hard. That is so hard because when things have an owner, they can decide what's right or what's wrong, but there is no hierarchy. There are no priests. Spiritism has no boss. In the Spiritist group, you have people who are entrusted to run the Spiritist goods, and they might have to make decisions for the group. They might coordinate and manage the group. That's understandable because somebody needs to pay rent, need to pay, need to do a schedule of talks and so forth. But Spiritism, the content itself, there is no boss. That means you have as much authority as anybody else, and you have to make your case. That is really hard because it forces all of us to work and exercise our critical thinking to see whether that which the other person is doing is inquiry-based, collaborative, open source, facts-based, all those things. It puts onus on us to kind of figure these things out. So, are we also doing that with our lives? Are we also evaluating things the way they are and not where they come from? That's a great question for our lives too. If there is no owner, then you're sort of the owner too. What are you doing about it? And it's got to be practical, right? To kind of wrap things up here. It's got to be practical. It has to be about answers to our questions, and it has to be applied to everyday life. Remember how Spiritism was born? By questions and answers? Then we have to study it with questions about how this works, but how does it make sense to me? If you're not asking yourself, how does this apply to my life, you're missing a big chunk of the beauty of Spiritism. If you haven't tried to translate what reincarnation means to you, you could be missing a big chunk of your learning process. Where are you going to be born next? Why? Oh my goodness, I might be born in a different country. Should I then have prejudice against people from different countries? That might be one of them. As a matter of fact, I do a talk, I don't know if I've ever done this, I don't think I've done this here. I play the roulette, the reincarnation roulette for fun, and we calculate the possibilities of you being born in a specific country today based on the population of the country. So I can tell you, for instance, just all things aside, as a little funny thing, if you don't like Chinese food or Indian food, you should start trying, because there's a 30% chance, given the population of the world, that you might be born, if all things were equal, right, your next life, because there's a third of the population in the world today is either Chinese or Indian, right? So start warming up.
I'm ready.
Start warming up, right? All jokes aside. But anyways, but you know what I'm saying? This is kind of like to kind of shake us up and think and make us think a little bit about us as immortal spirits, and that the fact that there should be no place for any kind of discrimination based on gender, color, race, sexual preference, because you're just this now. But you weren't this always. As a matter of fact, if you have some prejudice against one of these things, chances are you're being probably prejudiced about yourself in previous lives, because you might have also been that before. So we have to reevaluate how we are raised and the things that we bring, and bring them to our lives. That's one example, right? But there's so many different in there. There's so many different lessons we can take out of there. You lived many lives. You have so many people that you have loved and cared for in different lives, and they're still loving you even though you forgot about them. You're never alone in a good way. So so many things. But anyways, I digress. So my point is, to bring us home a little bit, Spiritism is this new thinking for this new era that is also meant to be new thinking for you and for me. How are we going to transform ourselves in ways that make us better human beings, better immortal spirits, who are contributing to the betterment of this planet? Maybe we can start with questions. Maybe we can do this inquiry piece. Maybe we can search for fact-based answers. We might not have them all the time, but we can search and make our own theories, but based on what we observe and what we know to be. Not just what we feel should be, or what we want to be. And let's make sure that it's also progressive, that we are always learning, that we're not stationary, that we're not getting too complacent and just kind of rolling in and rolling out, and next day all of a sudden, how have you grown? What have you learned? And make sure you work with other people. Are you listening to other people? Are you being collaborative, even for your own life? Are you taking feedback from other people? Are you evaluating their perspectives? Might be an important piece of information for you to redesign what is it that you want your life to be. Do you know what you want your life to be? Do you have plans? They don't have to be perfect, but do you have some sort of vision? What would you like? Are you working towards that? How are you working towards that? Right? Flat and democratic. Are you just obeying things because you think that's the law of the world, or have you thought about it? And what kind of contribution can you give to that? Are you listening to other people, or are you also just behaving like the king or queen within? We all do it. We all do it. Don't point fingers at yourself. But these are questions for reflection, right? That we ought to ask ourselves. And is it practical? Are you making it stick? That's some of the things that in Spiritism it's good for us to think about as we look at this whole piece. Because the way that it came about really aligns with what it's telling us might be interesting for us to study and do and implement in our lives.
But
I love that about Spiritism.
Read this? It's so tiny.
No, this was everything that we talked about.
Oh.
Right? Just focus on this one. Right? The point here too, to be clear, right, is that the DNA of Spiritism influences your past, what you bring and what you study, influences who you are. So all of these things has the ability to influence how you think about the world, but it will not determine your future. You will determine your future. You are in control. Your DNA, your makeup, whether it's physical or spiritual, it is where you've been and what you bring, but it's not what you will become. There are some tendencies in there, but you decide what you're going to do with this thing called Spiritism that you are looking into. And it's also important for us to know that it's an individual sport. You decide how you do it and how it works for you. Now, it's shared in the sense that it makes sense for us to talk about it together, but it's about what you're going to do, not what other people are going to do. Right? Free will. If we're telling people what they should be doing, then we might be breaking that whole idea of free will and things that we're doing. So you can suggest, but the expectation is different, right? And it's always mutating. We are always changing. Your understanding of who you are in the world is mutating, just like DNA is always changing. Our physical DNA in our bodies is not the same that it was 200,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, when we were Homo sapiens, and not Homo sapiens sapiens. Like, it changes with time because the spirit evolved. Anyways, different conversation. But you also change. So your past, what you bring, is being built on. You are making that, which I think is fascinating. And, like we said, it tells the past, not the future. Your experiences tell you who you were, not who you have to be, or who you are. Because every moment that you are amassing new information, that you are bringing new things into your knowledge and your minds and your heart, and you are following these beautiful examples of people that showed you that it's possible to be kind even in a difficult world, to remain soft even in hard times, to be loving, to be accepting, to continue to learn, to endure, to survive the world, and even to win over death, in the sense of you're never dying. Then you can kind of sense that you can make your future. You can obviously have constraints, but you can make a very big dent in what you want it to look like. And I hope that your studies of Spiritism remind you of that, and also remember that you're inheriting this knowledge, this process, this method, but you're also passing it on, just like you inherit DNA and pass it on. How you see Spiritism, how you study, and how you embrace this thinking process also has your collaboration in it. Also invite others into it in the sense of growing together. You're also passing it on. So how are we passing that on? Are we behaving ethically? Are we living by example? Are we open, effects-based? Are we open source? All of those things that we talked about. So anyways, my point is, we make a parallel with our physical DNAs to kind of make an argument that we are evolving and changing and growing as immortal spirits or temporarily in the flesh. And there might be some benefits for us to think about how to do things, not try to find out what they are, but how do they come to be? And how do we align ourselves with that which we want? That's what like I said, I like so much about Spiritism, is that it is very aligned with itself. It does what it says it wants to do. If it doesn't, if there's a discrepancy, I would suggest that you investigate. Right? So, I hope that this perspective will help you in your studies of Spiritism as you're thinking about things, as you're reading your books. What other sources are there that you can corroborate what you're reading against? How can you apply that? How do you know that that's true? Does it resonate for you? Are you taking input from other people? Are you doing that in your life? I think these are things that Spiritism is teaching us without always telling us directly. When we read about mediumship, when we read about reincarnation, it's about critical thinking, it's about growing, it's about helping others, transforming yourselves. So I hope that's helpful. And I hope that you enjoyed slightly different perspective, Spiritism that hasn't driven you nuts on the Monday night. And thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
I think we have a couple of minutes there. I think we have about 5 minutes before it's 10 minutes to 9. So if there's something that wasn't clear or that you want to double click on to go a little bit deeper, then this is the time. That was quick. Oh, hold on a second. There's somebody back there. Yvonne, you're too eager to learn.
Because I don't have no time to waste.
So they came up. Allan Kardec came up with the first 1,019 questions, but that was a long time ago. And since then, I'm sure there are other questions that people have thought of. I mean, first was 501. So has Spiritism or the people, the movement, thought about, okay, hey, you know what? Let's find out about transgender, or let's find out about getting a breast augmentation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, there's different things. So have they thought about actually not just having, okay, here's this book that's a part of Spiritism, but expanding the questions?
The answer is heck yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, there's a lot of books that follow after that. That people that, for instance, the Spirit Emmanuel has one book called The Consoler, which is questions and answers, the answers as well, right? But all of these are ancillary, additional questions. And I think there has been probably a big debate of like, oh, should we make a spirits book part 2?
Right.
And then the question is, who would do it?
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like nice to leave the original in there by Kardec and invite anybody who wants to add to the field on this question. So these topics, whether it is homosexuality, transgender, prejudices, and all, it's all popping up by different people in different places. They're just newer topics, and so we don't have a lot of resources in them yet. But they make wonderful conversations when we think about the spirit first. There are wonderful perspectives that Spiritism may come to bear on these topics that may make more sense than you would otherwise have if you're just trying to understand why is somebody born a specific way.
But they did that book that you're talking about did the same thing. Tried to ask multiple different spirits the same question.
No, in that particular book, for instance, that particular book was one spirit called Emmanuel who was answering questions.
I saw that.
Yeah, but there's people who have tried to do that, but in many different ways. That happens in every book that is published. What do I mean by that? Because you have a perspective of one spirit. Our job is to be the next level of Kardec, so to speak, where we take that one book and I say, I read it in this book, I also read it in this book. Does this make sense? Some people try to do that, some of the studies as well. Right? Some people try to say, here's a topic, and here's where I found this, and this, and you can read their piece. But remember, these are just inputs. Right? It's up to you to decide. But more and more that is happening. Like for instance, there are a lot of, right now it seems very, very warrantedly, it seems that we're sort of like in a psychological phase in Spiritism. There are so many study groups about the work of Joanna de Angelis who takes a look at the ego, the self, and so forth. And so there's many works coming out in this area. But there's also interesting works coming out in the medical area, the physical piece, right? So there are different people doing different things. It's that sometimes we are not curious enough to go look for them. And they're not always easy to find, true, because truth is there aren't millions and millions and billions of us throughout the world, right? Spiritism is still a very small slice of the spiritual thinking out there. But for sure, there are many people who try to bring that information together. And it's sort of like, I feel like each one of us should do a little bit of that for our lives. If you find something that's interesting, a topic that you want to learn more about, then go and do that research a little bit. Bring that stuff together. And if you're up for it, then let us know how it goes. Maybe write a book, add to the body of knowledge. That's how Spiritism grows, right? It's by somebody saying, I want to know more about this. And they go study and they bring it together and offer it for us. And that's what it makes it so hard. Because there isn't a boss or a printing press that says, here's the word on this, this, and this. Anything else? My wife is an educator, and she has taught me to never let people leave the room without asking 3 questions. So you have one more. We'll do a discount today.
A discount.
Because it is Monday night after all. It's a little bit cold in here now. At least for me.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it actually worked.
It's working.
It is.
It's working really well.
Very. Extremely well.
Congratulations. Any other comment or perspective, or it's something that was not clear?
I think that you have one, right?
Well, no, that's something that I'll investigate myself. Well, because I do hypnotherapy now, so I thought that would be something that'd be interesting. Because when I work with clients, we tend to do regression, so we'll do like past life, past genetics. But do you know maybe any books or anybody who's investigated more? Like I heard of Dolores Cannon, for example, but yeah, it was just.
For regression and all that good stuff, you have the traditional people that we all heard about, right? From Ryan Wise to Michael Newton, the in-between lives and lives. So they're not spiritists, but they've added to it. We do find, I don't remember one specific book within Spiritism that talks about that. I'm sure there might be some different pieces. But we see that idea being repeated by different spirits. Even in the spirits book is to try not to mess with those memories unless they're really traumatic and warranted.
Right.
And they have not been able to be addressed with traditional means. Because sometimes they are caused by some events in previous lives that are not yet ready to be processed, right? But there's some interesting stuff. It doesn't mean don't do it. It means be careful, right? Because, for instance, if you think about the fact that we continue to evolve always, then it also follows that the more you look back, the less good things you're going to see in yourself and others.
Right.
Because if they're always evolving, when we look back, it means you're looking theoretically down, right? And so you might find things that might really hurt you if they're not protected. You might find that the person that you're with today has killed you in a previous life.
Oh, okay.
Right? That might be difficult to process. It might alter relationships.
Yeah.
You might find, I always find it interesting that sometimes people were really enamored by the idea of who they were in a previous life. I'm very curious. I want to know. But also, there's only so many queens and kings out there, right?
Oh yeah, right.
Because everybody's been like
Yeah.
a king and queen.
Everyone's
And with the understanding I have today, I don't know if that's a good thing,
yeah.
right? And so it's a very interesting topic. And this idea of do we remember, should we not remember our previous lives? It's a very delicate one. I think look for case to case. But the Spirits book has a little bit of that. I'm trying to remember who else. The Spiritist Medical Association might be a place for you to go to.
Okay, sounds good. Because we
yes.
don't like go in. We don't do just regression. Like we work with like the subconscious mind, subconscious blocks, and whatever we're working on that the client has come to us for. We let it just happen organically, but the main objective is to take like the positive learnings.
Wonderful. The works of Joanna de Angelis, psychologically, which follows a lot the Jungian tradition, are fascinating. So there's always a lot of different events. For instance, there's going to be a congress now in England in September about exactly that, right?
Okay.
How does the unconscious manifest, and how does that relate to reincarnation and so forth? So there's also wonderful little things there.
Sounds
But-
good. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, it's awesome things. Just go search for it.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you make a great contribution. And I also want to just say thank you because I think our time. That's right. Do you have a question, or is that okay that we still have time? Go for it, my friend.
Just curious, thank you for your help, by the way. Just curious, why the contact with the spirits only happening in 1857, not before?
It did happen before. Throughout our history, if you look at it, the spirits have always been talking to us. So, for instance, if you look at the prophets on the Old Testament, on the New Testament, right? That's mediumship. We just don't call it that because the term mediumship didn't exist, right? But if you think about it, the prophets, they are connecting with the spirits and giving us. The difference is that it's symbolically collecting with angels and God, which are spiritual, right? And so the difference from 1857 on is that we took a more scientific approach to try to understand what was going on and how the communication takes place. So, for instance, the second book that Kardec worked on after he created this wonderful book called the Spirits Book, with a lot of questions and answers, was, all right, now that we have this basic questions and answer, let's come up with a book so people understand how we came up with that first book. What was the method in which we used to communicate with the spirits so that people, if they want to do that on their own, they can do it in a safe manner, right? Because the idea was to empower people and not say, no, I'm the only one who knows how to do this, you should trust me. It was like, here it is. Here's how you can learn about mediumship. So the 1863, the mediums book, and all the kind of stuff over there, really becomes the first time that it democratizes the understanding of how can you communicate with the spiritual world. But it's always existed, right? There's prophets, there are, like I said, shamans, sibyls, oracles. There's so many different names in different cultures. It's always talk to the spirits. The difference is, what do we call them, and how did we do that, right? So I think it's really interesting. It's a really cool topic to explore. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here and for putting up with me.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so very much for your.
And to wrap up our activity today, I invite you, if you're willing, to raise your thoughts and hearts together. Dear God, thank you for everything that is brought to us. Thank you for the challenges, the resources, the opportunities that we are given. Because all of it help us grow, even when we may not realize it. Inspire us to remember that we are immortal spirits who have faced challenging circumstances before and have succeeded in navigating our way to where we are today. and that you will always be by our side, as will be our spiritual friends who are invested in our spiritual success. So help us bring some joy, love, and hope to our hearts, and be the bearers of that light in this difficult world. Help us remind ourselves that we have accomplished much, and that we have withstood much, and that there's more ahead of us, and that our example, our kindness, our love also serve others, and that if we serve each other in that sense, the world will certainly become a better place sooner than later. Thank you for this group, for our families on both sides of life, and for the knowledge and understanding that we're beginning to internalize in our hearts. Thank you for all of that and much more, for which we do not have words. And let us take these good energies to our homes and to our week, making it the best we can with what we have. Thank you, God. So be it.